Thank you very much, Alexander. I appreciate that introduction. I never quite thought of comparing our son's future career to renewable energy. But, Alan, I appreciate your general introduction to this and what you said. And I know I'm going to be followed by many experts here in the energy area. I was talking to Phil Van Horn, who's coming. He's going to be the last speaker. And he was saying, you know, as the last speaker, he gets to rebut everything everyone else says. So I'm going to be careful what I say here, especially since I'm a corporate and finance lawyer. My expertise is not in the energy area. I interacted in the energy area, and I think I just give you, since where people stand depends upon where they sit, I might as well let you know my background and how I've interacted in the energy area. I've done a lot of financings from renewables to nuclear power plants to purple machines, shale oil, oil and shale gas, tar sands, coal to gas, geothermal. I worked in bankruptcy of solar companies, nuclear facilities. Any of you remember Whoops way back when? It's a great deal for lawyers. And very educated a lot of us as to when the Supreme Court of Washington made their decision based more on politics than on precedent, much to the dismay of the lawyers involved. As chairman of the State University Construction Fund, I'm a trustee of the State University of New York, we got very much involved in green buildings and green bonds and renewable energy requirements. I remember when George Pataki came down with his requirement of we had to buy 25% of our energy, or a $300 million a year budget for energy at the State University. We had to buy it from renewable sources, excluding hydropower. I'm also, for 29 years, I've been a member of the board of Noble Energy, which is a New York Stock Exchange company, a $20 million market cap, and their business of fracking, deep water drilling, geopolitics of Israeli gas, because we have all the gas off Israel, West African oil. I've also been involved in the politics of energy. I worked for 4 years on and off with Ralph Nader, getting his Nader Radar organization started. His view was a little bit different than President Nixon's when I was living in the White House for 3 years. That was the era, if you recall, of price controls, of import quotas back then. And then when I worked in the Reagan administration in the energy area, it was different. That was free market, let's get rid of price controls, and it was a wholly different approach politically. Very instructive seeing the different views. And now, as the chairman of the state party, Republican State Party here in New York, and the chair of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund, that's how I look at energy now. What this conference is about is, and what I've been asked to do here, this keynote talk, is a broad national perspective of the role of renewable energy as a component of the national energy mix. And I think since I'm going to get rebutted down the line here, I'm going to stick just to the facts. And the facts are that renewable energy at this point is a very small component of our state energy mix and our national energy mix. That's the reality of it. It is politically driven. What is basically what renewable energy does get used, and it is really under attack now by the low prices of natural gas, which offers many benefits that renewable energy gives. Not the whole thing, but much less carbon emissions than oil and coal, and is at this point and it looks like in the foreseeable future, very, very cheap. Exceptions to this, of course, are hydropower, which now accounts for 7% of our power in the United States. Other countries, it's 80%, such as Brazil. Another exception is ethanol, which is 10% of our transportation fuel, and that is, again, a government requirement. I could refer to biofuels in Brazil, where, given the price of gas or biofuel, they have flex cars and flex gas stations. Biofuels could go up as far as 60 or 70% of the use in a place like Brazil, but we're not there. Our markets are different. Our competitive markets just generally are not supportive of renewables. The renewables that most people focus on are solar and wind. And when you're talking solar and wind, you're talking about electricity. Electricity consumption over the last 20 years has doubled in the United States and expected, looking at it on a global basis, to double again in the next 20 years. So the use of solar and wind will grow, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be any large proportion of our power supplies. Electricity, as we all know, can be made from coal, oil, natural gas, uranium, from water, wind, sun, garbage. All can go in to making of electricity. But as Alan pointed out in his opening remarks, electric power is a long-term business. It is a capital-intensive business. It is a business that looks for stability. But it's also subject to public policy and to popular opinion. And as Alan was pointing out, if in fact the grid gets more open, we have smart grids, and people want to buy more expensive power that's renewable, that would make it available to them. But we're not there yet. So let me put the facts out on the table here about the current mix of fuels for electricity. Here in the United States, coal has the largest share. At its height, there was 55% because of inexpensive gas. It has declined rather rapidly. It's now 45% of all of our electric power generation is coal. Natural gas is next, and it's growing. It's 23%, and it will keep rising. Nuclear is at 20%. Even though we haven't built a new nuclear plant in many, many years, our nuclear plants have gotten more and more efficient in their deliverability, and it's maintained its 20% portion of the power market on an ongoing basis. Hydropower, 7%. There was a time back when the low-head hydro was growing, but people are concerned about the environmental impacts of low-head hydro, and it's not growing, it's 7%. Wind, only 2%. Solar doesn't even register as a percentage. Oil has declined from 15% to just 1% of our power supplies. Mostly because gas has been supplanting it. Looking on the international arena, because energy markets are becoming more global along with everything else. If you take a look at oil, of course, has always been a global market, but now even natural gas, with the development of LNG markets, is becoming a global market. In Europe, in Europe, nuclear, coal, and natural gas each have 25% of the power markets. Hydro's 15%, wind is 4%, oil's 3%. Solar really doesn't show up. Germany, as you know, has now said they're going to get rid of all their nuclear power plants. Quite a dramatic move by the chancellor. And guess what? It's not more wind power. They're buying coal from the United States, and they're using what had been their basic resource of lignite. Pretty dirty stuff. for their plants to take the place of the nukes that they are phasing out. In Japan, 28% is coal, 28% nuclear, and natural gas is 26%. When you're talking natural gas in Japan, you're talking LNG at about 19 or $20 per MCF, very expensive. Not sure it'll grow that much compared to coal or nuclear. Oil's 8%, hydro 8%, wind is negligible, and even though there was an emphasis on solar in Japan from the government, it is again negligible. China, 80% of their electricity is produced from coal. Anyone who's traveled over there and been in Beijing and you try at the wrong time, you understand coal dominates the power markets there. Hydro accounts for about 20% of their power supply. Not much room for wind or solar, even though they are the largest producer of solar panels. And there is a government emphasis on cleaning up the environment. In India, it's about the same, 70% is coal. Hydropower is about 15% in India. So those are the U.S. markets and the natural markets. On a global basis, then, coal, nuclear, natural gas are going to be dominant for a long period of time. With natural gas, because of its being cheaper and less carbon and pollutants per BTU, is going to be growing in the market, and the development, as I stated before, of the LNG markets nationally. Really, the gas market is being driven by technology. It's interesting, in the renewable area, there has not been a Moore's law, if you will, as there is in the technology area, where costs keep coming down because of technological developments. In renewable area, that hasn't happened, but in the natural gas area, in the shale developments, shale gas, the technological developments just happen on a regular basis, and they happen out in the field. I've seen this as a director of Noble Energy, when our folks are out there in the field, come back and say, gee, we just found out we can take the gel out of the water so we can recirculate the water rather than dispose of it. And I asked the engineers who come in there, have you had this? Oh no, we just did it. Stuff is happening out in the field with respect to natural gas and the ways of doing horizontal drilling and layers of horizontal drilling and fracking. It's going to keep natural gas prices, if not declining, certainly at the very low level that they are now, and more than competitive. And they will be, with other sources of power, they'll be driving the power markets for some period of time. Incredibly, as you all know, the United States is now thinking of exporting LNG. And that is a big political topic going on in Washington, whether it should do it or whether refiners should get the benefit of the cheap natural gas, and we export and use refined products. So the renewable market is going to be based on, I say, dreams. People who are looking to the future and have a vision of the future for whatever reason. Their view of global warming, or their view of energy independence. If you have solar and you have wind, you don't have to import that. Of course, it was President Nixon who started the term energy independence. When he gave that speech, the people who were writing it kept saying they wanted to keep taking that phrase out. Where's that coming from again? Who's putting that phrase back in? Oh, it's the old man himself. He wanted to make a point about energy independence. But it's a squishy concept. It's more of a political concept, especially as markets get more global. What does energy independence mean? We're exporting LNG and importing oil in other places for transportation uses. Then when you've got the International Energy Agency, which you didn't have back then. We got the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which you didn't have back then. When you don't have the communism versus democracy in the sense we need national security, therefore we need energy independence as part of that. Energy independence is more a political concept than a power market related concept. The politics that would drive renewables, putting aside personal preferences, of course, climate change, global warming. And politically, it is possible for those concerns to be put into, to drive themselves into the market through the political process. And it doesn't take legislative action to do it, because the Supreme Court has ruled that CO2 is a pollutant that the EPA can regulate, and President Obama in his State of the State has said if Congress won't act, he will take executive actions to speed the transition to more sustainable sources of energy. The question is, at what cost? Jimmy Carter was concerned about the same thing. Those who look back, the energy situation was a moral equivalent of war, which we in the Reagan administration called meow. With respect to the sense that we were running out of our energy resources. We were running out of natural gas back then, as you will recall. That's why Carter did FUA. Not many people, I was talking to Phil Van Horn, and he actually knew what FUA was. I'm not sure. Fuel Use Act, it forbid utilities from using gas because we were running out of gas. Well, we're not running out of gas now. But Carter imposed his concepts back then of Rome, running out of these natural resources, and imposed them on the energy markets, distorted the energy markets, and he was a one-term president in part because of that. I'm not sure that President Obama wants to go down the same path and impose costs on the energy markets, and that's his political issue. He has the power to, in fact, put requirements on the market that are driven by concepts of global warming. The Supreme Court has given him that power. I'm not sure if he would want to, from a political point of view, to use it. And of course, EPA then, as it works through their system, through the court system, there'll be a lot of questions as to how it can be, how it could be imposed. So I think while the power is there, it's going to be used. It's going to be used probably carefully. How else can renewables be advanced in this kind of a situation? The market can have tools on the demand side, again driven by politics. A price floor on petroleum through a petroleum tax, which would, or on gas. Or state-mandated demands, as the one I mentioned with respect to the state university that Governor Pataki has imposed, not just on the state university, but on all state agencies. The Navy has said that they want the Great Green Fleet, one half being of their liquid fuels being biofuels. You then run into questions, is it better to have a tax or is it better to have regulations to drive the renewables into the market? Tax is much more equitable in a way, and it lets people decide what they want to do, but then of course, we didn't have regulations, we wouldn't have had that with respect to transportation, cars, and the CAFE standards, we wouldn't have had a catalytic converter. So it's hard to say which is the better way to go. Regulations can, of course, change, as I pointed out. Carter was trying to drive the market. Reagan got rid of the regulations. Bush and Clinton imposed them again to a certain extent. Regulations can change, and the energy market does not like changing politics, changing policies. But tax regimes can change also. That's on the demand side. On the supply side, there's a lot of enthusiasm for green tech, as you will recall, when gas prices were back 7-8 years ago at $13 per MCF, and oil prices were at $120 going up to maybe $200, as Goldman Sachs once predicted that they would back then. And venture capitalists got very interested in developing new technologies and investing in Kleiner Perkins in particular. But energy is different from technology. It's the success that venture capitalists had in technology, and the same thing didn't work in the energy area. As I said, there's no Moore's law in this area except with respect to shale gas and shale oil. Venture capitalists work, and I know this from my venture capital financing work, they have limited partnerships that have to dissolve in 5 to 10 years, with the profits then distributed to the investors. Energy works on a much longer time frame than that. Energy's working in a established infrastructure that is very hard to introduce new products into. And venture capitalists, even though they have the term venture in their name, they have a basic rule that is, thou shalt not do scientific developments. And most venture capitalists actually prefer to invest in later stages of development, not at the very start. That's unusual for them, but in the later stages before they're going public. That's a traditional area for most venture capitalists to invest in. So the clean tech was a concept that came, I think, with declining energy prices and driven by technology and fracking, and by the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. It's still there on the supply side, particularly in biofuels, looking at how you develop switchgrass and other forms of biofuels that would work here in the United States, like sugarcane works in Brazil. With batteries, trying to find the best battery to store electricity, which would make renewable energy more viable. Let me just go briefly over the kinds of renewable energy that there are. First, obviously, is wind. Problems with wind farms. This would be the fastest growing area of renewable technology. Is the variability of wind. It's not a base load. And if there's too much wind at a certain time, it can overload the grid. Environmentalists are now complaining about views and how the wind farms can disturb views. Problems with birds being killed by the windmills. The noise is being raised. The problem of wheeling wind, because where the wind is strongest is a long distance from where the electricity is needed, and wheeling it there, and the expense of that is a problem with wind. Next, photovoltaic cells. Only really cost effective in specific areas, not again as a base load. As I mentioned before, Japan, despite the government emphasis on it, it's not even accounting for 1% of their power supplies. But there are potential technological advances here. This goes back to the clean tech stuff that I was talking about. Thin film cells. They're less efficient than silicon, but cheaper. That's one of the developing technologies. But again, when you're talking about new technologies in the energy area, it's long lead time, got to develop science, then the engineering, then the infrastructure to get into the energy markets. Biofuels, that again, as I mentioned, that's where technological breakthroughs are possible. A lot of research and development is being done. DNA analysis of plants, development of cellulose ethanol, and algae. That's another area. I think there's a picture of it in the brochure for today's conference. Algae being little refineries that turn sunlight and CO2 into oxygen, and apparently they supply 40% of our oxygen from CO2. Algae all over the world, and they produce a lot of bio-oils. So maybe algae is an area where we would have a big breakthrough in the biotech biofuels area. Ethanol, of course, is huge because it's 10%. It's mandated to be 10% of our transportation fuels, or on a BTU basis, 7%. That market has run into problems and I won't get into the weeds on this, but renewable identification numbers that are used, refiners has gone from 1 cent up to $1 per unit. Refiners pass it on to consumer, and that's driving up the cost of ethanol. As a process, there's now, as they look at the energy that goes into developing ethanol, that maybe more energy goes into it than comes out of it. And that question is being raised. It has to be shipped and stored separately from gas. The cost, because here in the United States we use corn for ethanol, is that driving up the cost of food all around the world, especially in poorer countries? So the viability of ethanol and the tax benefits that are given to it, and the fact that Iowa is the first of the primary states, and that's what drives the politics of it. You find people such as John McCain saying, do we really, is it really right that we use ethanol and require it to be used as 10% of our transportation fuels? Then, of course, there's energy efficiency. Not a renewable per se, but I think as far as if you just look at it and you're concerned about global warming and you want to decrease the amount of CO2 that's going to the air. And this comes from, well, we looked at the Earthly Conservation Voters Education Fund and the forums we had on. You're talking natural gas and you're talking energy efficiency. It's not sexy, but it is, and it's not technically a renewable, but it is perhaps one of the, and there are lots of different ways of driving it, but if you're concerned about carbon in the air and what global warming energy efficiency is perhaps one of the best ways to reduce that, just simply by saving energy. That goes to the new LED light bulbs, green buildings, the LED LEED formulas. Now SUNY requires, something we did when I was chairman of the State University Construction Fund, we require silver LEED status for every building, new building that's built for the State University. Transportation fuel efficiencies, we have achieved those in the past by regulation, and it looks like we're going to be trying to do it again. From 1970 to the present, we have reduced the amount of energy that we need for inputs per GDP unit by 1/2. And we expect that to continue going into the future. Smart growth would be a part of this. That is, people, rather than having urban sprawl, clusters of living quarters. Smart grids are another method of energy efficiency. So that's the sort of where we are now. Just let me close by giving a little history of renewables. I think it's instructive. Let's go back to 1970. Earth Day, which was really environmentalism coming on to the national stage. And President Nixon signed the Clean Air Act into law. He established the Environmental Protection Agency by executive order. And this was the start of the environmental movement. And the oil shocks of 73 and 79 led to a focus on renewables. But back then, that term didn't exist. People were talking about solar. And President Carter put on the roof of the White House a hot water heater. That was solar energy then, hot water heater. He held a press conference on the roof of the White House, only one ever held on the roof of the White House. At the same time, some of you may remember Amory Lovins and his article in Foreign Affairs about the soft path of renewable energy and the more efficient use of energy as against the hard path of coal, oil, gas, and nuclear. And again, the thought was they were running out of oil and gas. They were limited fuels, and therefore we would need to have go along on the soft path. That was the time of FUA and of synfuels, which I was a part of in the Reagan administration. Thought was that the price of oil was going to go from $40 a barrel up to $100 a barrel. It was $40 a barrel back then. Well, it didn't. It went down to $10 a barrel. But at the time, for instance, Jim Schlesinger was pulled together and create all the 50 agencies that were concerned with energy into the Department of Energy. He said, solar has captured the public imagination. It's a clean and plentiful fuel that we don't have to import. That was a time when tax incentives, R&D funding, the Solar Energy Industries Association had 1,000 companies, including General Motors and Exxon. There were high hopes back then. But of course, as energy prices didn't go up to $100 for oil, but went down to $10, and with the Reagan administration focused on the free markets and the end of price controls, solar and renewables kind of disappeared off of the political agenda. But the environmental movement did not. It kept on going. And with President George H.W. Bush, the environmental movement, he was, remember, kinder and gentler administration. And the tax incentives were renewed, the Clean Air Amendments of 1990. The term renewable energy, that's when it came into being. The focus not just on solar, but wind, ethanol, and also geothermal. Prices didn't come back as much as people thought they might. So it was more just the environment movement generally. Clinton continued it. States continued because the environmental movement encouraging renewable portfolio standards. And that's the result of what I mentioned about the state university and the requirements that were put on us by Governor Pataki's executive order of how we should allocate our $300 million a year that the state university pays for energy. Even in Texas, Governor Bush in 1999, in order to keep up with the trend, mandated renewable portfolio standards, and that state agencies in Texas acquire renewable energy. And in fact, given Texas and where it is in the plains, there's very successful development of wind technologies there. And that continued on a sort of a low level in the States and internationally, and in Germany with the success of the Green Party. They put requirements which helped develop some wind and solar power in Germany. That's why Germany has 15% of their power supplied by wind. And around 2003, 2004, energy prices started going up again. And the concerns about climate change and the scientific proof about the reasons for global warming became clearer. And we had another burst of interest in renewable energy. That ended with the Great Recession and with the development of very cheap natural gas, which will continue. Despite the fact that the questions here in New York State about the governor being concerned that there's a lack of scientific evidence that that fracking may not be safe. It's being done in just about every other state. And as I said before, the technology of it is developing and will continue to develop. We know the resources there. It's very easy to get out of the ground very quickly. When the prices of natural gas goes up, I was talking to some of the people, investment bankers who deal in the energy markets, the price of natural gas is going to hover between $3 and $5 per MCF. If it goes up to $5, you're going to find a lot of areas where it's a little bit more expensive to get the natural gas out of the ground. And that's going to make a very difficult environment for renewables to be competitive on a price basis. So that is where I see, in realistic terms, the present energy markets are and the chances of renewable success going forward. Thank you very much.